We're going to try to tackle, with God's help, 2 chapters tonight, 29 and 30. Jacob has been guilty of a very common mistake that we often make, and that is trying to help God out. Believing in the purposes of God, knowing that God is desiring to accomplish certain things, we somehow develop a kind of a complex that God cannot do His work unless I get in and help Him. For surely the work of God is going to fall unless I step in and take charge. It was God's will that Jacob received the blessing of Esau. Before he was ever born, when his mother was praying about that problem pregnancy, remember, God told her there were 2 nations in her womb that were diverse from each other. And He told her that the elder would serve the younger. And now Isaac was seeking to reverse that. He was planning to give the blessing to Esau, reversing what God had declared. And Rebekah, knowing that Isaac was planning to bless Esau, and in the blessing that he thought he was going to give Esau, he made his brothers his servants. But Rebekah had Jacob disguise himself as his brother, take in goat meat that she had prepared so that it would taste like venison. And then with the guise of being his elder brother, Jacob deceived his father, claimed to be his older brother, gave him the goat meat that his mother had prepared to taste like venison, the barbecue venison that he loved. And Isaac ate of the venison and blessed Jacob with the blessing that he had intended to bless Esau with. Well, no sooner had Jacob departed, and Esau comes in with the venison that his father had asked, and Isaac, then trembling, realized that his plans to cross the plan of God had been thwarted. Esau wept for the loss of the blessing, asking of his father if there was something left that he could give him. "Bless me, Father, bless me. Isn't there something that you can bless me with?" And then Esau comforted himself with the thought that, well, my dad's old, he's going to die pretty soon, and as soon as he dies, I'm going to kill Jacob. Rebekah, well, evidently, he had voiced his intentions to some of the servants who told Rebekah, and Rebekah called Jacob and said, I want you to go to my brother's house in Haran and stay there until I notify you, because your brother's intending to kill you. So Jacob fled from that place near Beersheba, 500 miles to the area of Babel in Haran. And in chapter 29, we find him now coming to the conclusion of this 500-mile journey, now arriving at Haran. And oh, this is going to be a journey. Let me tell you. This is not all going to be peaches and cream. Let's take a look, beginning with verse 1. So Jacob went on his journey and came to the land of the people of the east. And he looked and saw a well in the field, and behold, there were 3 flocks of sheep lying by it, for out of that well they watered the flocks. A large stone was on the well's mouth. Now all the flocks would be gathered there, and they would roll the stone from the well's mouth, water the sheep, and then put the stone back in its place on the well's mouth. And Jacob said to them, "My brethren, where are you from?" And they said, "Well, we are from Haran." And he said to them, "Oh, do you know Laban, the son of Nahor?" And they said, "Oh, we know him." So he said to them, "Is he well?" They said, "He is well." "And look, his daughter Rachel is coming with the sheep," they said. Then he said, "Look, it's still high day. It's not time for the cattle to be gathered together. Water the sheep and go and feed them. Go." He's trying to send them away. Evidently, Jacob was wanting to get rid of these little guys with their sheep so that when Rachel did arrive, he would be alone with her. Interesting, again, how that God led him to the well, even as the servant earlier, remember, Eleazar had been led by the Lord and had come to the place where Rebekah was coming out to get water. So Jacob now coming to the well. It was an interesting type of well, not the usual type for dipping the buckets in, but a well that was close by a rock and then would roll back the rock and then they would let the water out. Probably took a while for the water to build up inside so that when they would roll it back, you'd get a good flow of water out to the sheep. And the stone evidently was too heavy for the little boys who were watering the sheep to move it by themselves. So they wait till the whole group arrives, and then the one that was stronger would roll the stone back to water their sheep, and then they would leave. These little guys were gathering early that day, and it could be that they would water them in the order in which they had arrived. First come, first served. The first to arrive with their sheep would be the first in line, so that when the rock was removed, they would be the first ones to get the water. So you lined up, and thus the desire to get there early. So it was just about noon, high day, and these little fellows were already lining up when they should still be out in the field, really. They should still have their sheep out there pasturing, but they wanted to get in line early, so they left early to get in line early to be at the front of the line. So they're waiting for that time in the evening when the stone is rolled back so they can water their sheep. Not getting a lot of work done doing it that way. So the boys are not that communicative, as you can see. Do you know Laban? We know him. Is he well? He's well. They're boys. They're teenagers. They're not real communicative. Right, Michelle? Little kids don't communicate, do they? You got to pry it out of them. Jacob comes up and asks, "Where are you boys from?" "Haran." "Oh, you know Laban?" "Yeah." "Is he well?" "Yeah, he's well." They're typical kids. Oh, one of them says, "Hey, there comes his daughter right now with her sheep." So Rachel was a shepherdess. Not at all unusual. If you go over to the land today, you find in the Bedouins that you have that little, there's the little girls out there tending to the sheep. Rachel was on her way. And he probably wanted to get rid of the little boys at this point, for sure. So he says, hey guys, you're a little early here. Why don't you go feed your sheep or something? Go take them back out to the pasture. Verse 8, but they said, we cannot until all the flocks are gathered together, and they have rolled the stone from the well's mouth. Then we water the sheep. Now, while he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep. She was a shepherdess. And it came to pass when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, that Jacob went near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. Now, this is why we meet on Sunday night Bible study, so that you can get the story behind the story. Because if you just read that with a Western mindset, you think, well, it's just, common nature. Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, the sheep of the Laban, his mother's brother. Jacob went near, rolled the stone from the well's mouth. What Jacob did was showed off. What Jacob did was chase the little boys away, and then, it took so many little boys to roll that, but big macho Jacob wanted to take that stone himself and show off it. So usually, instead of having the several guys roll back the stone, he sees Rachel, sees her getting close. He waits till he makes sure that she can see him, and then he rolls up his T-shirt, I'm sure, and moves that big rock so that Rachel can water the flock. Verse 11, then Jacob kissed Rachel and lifted up his voice and wept. And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's relative and that he was Rebekah's son. So she ran and told her father. Now, I don't know if it happened in that order. If he kissed her first and then wept and told her that who he was, and if he, or if it was the other way around, I don't know. But I'm sure that Rachel was probably taken aback, at least by the whole scene. She no doubt had heard the story of her aunt Rebekah, who was taken by the servant of Abraham to be the wife of Abraham's son. And now that the story involved the well and how that Rebekah had been very prosperous as the wife of Isaac, and they came from a very prosperous family. So there was already some romantic connotations in regards to the family of Laban and the family of Abraham, and it centered around the well. So here is a relative now, actually he's a cousin of her, and he kisses her. He cries with no doubt a cry of thanksgiving, just overcome with emotion. It's been 500 miles. It's been a long journey. God had been faithful. God has brought him to the family, and not only that, but it says of Rachel a little later on that she was of beautiful form and feature. So she was a beautiful gal, and he's overcome with emotion and tells her who he is. I am Rebekah's son, your aunt, your brother's sister. And then it came to pass, verse 13, when Laban heard the report about Jacob, his sister's son, that he ran to meet him and embraced him and kissed him, which is the typical greeting in that Middle Eastern world, and brought him to his house. So he told Laban all these things, and Laban said to him, surely you are my bone and my flesh, and he stayed with him for a month. Oh. Well then Laban said to Jacob, because you are my relative, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what should your wages be? Laban sounds like he's a pretty upfront guy, right? Don't be fooled. Evidently, during the month that he was there, he has pitched in. He's helped with the chores, with the duties. He has helped, do this, that, and the other. And he was a very industrious person. So Laban says, look, hey, you're a relative, but because of that, you shouldn't be working for me for nothing. I ought to be paying you wages. Really what Laban was probably thinking, if I don't give him something, he's going to take off. And man, he's doing such a great job. So he said, what wages do you want? Verse 16, Laban had 2 daughters, and the name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were delicate, but Rachel was beautiful of form and appearance. And Jacob loved Rachel. So he says, well, I will serve you for 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter. And Laban probably would have given him the daughter to marry. Probably would have just given it. But hey, 7 years of labor out of this guy, that sounds pretty good, he's thinking. And Laban said, it's better that I give her to you than I should give her to another man. So stay with me. So the deal was made. So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and this part is beautiful. And they seemed only a few days to him because of the love that he had for her. And everybody goes, aww. 7 years of labor went by so fast because he loved her so much. And I hate to take away from the romance of the whole story. I hate to do that because it is so neat. But Jacob was a little over 70 years old at this point. But he lived to be 165, so he's still a kid. He hasn't even reached the halfway mark yet. So considering the virility and all and the longevity, it isn't that old in those days. So he wasn't too old to be romantic, and the love that he had for her, so great. 7 years just seemed like a few days. I like that. Verse 21. Darling, I'm going to need some water, please, if you don't mind. Then Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled, that I may go into her. So, hey, the 7 years are up, right? She's mine now. And Laban gathered together all the men of the place and made a big feast. Came to pass in the evening that he took, who? Leah. He took Leah, his daughter, and brought her to Jacob. And he went into her. And Laban gave his maid Zilpah to his daughter Leah as a maid. So it came to pass in the morning, behold, it was Leah. He discovers it was Leah. And he says to Laban, what have you done to me? Was it not for Rachel that I served you? Why then have you deceived me? And all of us in a Western mindset are wondering, how could that have ever happened? Well, that's why we're here tonight, because I get to explain that to you. Executing this swap would not have been difficult. It would not have been difficult for him not to know. Thank you so much. You're thinking of your own wedding, perhaps, and you're thinking you're thinking, there's no way I could have not known that was not my... Well, listen how it works here. It's a little different. The custom of the ancient world, like it or not, the bride kept completely veiled and concealed in extravagant dress, unrecognizable. Her unveiling happened only in the bridal chamber and only under the cover of darkness. So it came about in the morning when the sun came up that, behold, it was Leah. Behold, indeed. What a dizzying realization that must have been for Jacob, and what a coincidence, too. Just as Jacob, the second-born, deceived his father Isaac by disguising himself as the firstborn, so too Jacob found himself deceived by the same method. Laban disguised his firstborn as the second-born, and Jacob fell victim to the same trick that he had played on his father Isaac. That was no coincidence. The principle of measure for measure set those events in motion. Jacob was paying the price for his deception of his father and brother. He did not get away with that. And those consequences had ramifications that reverberated for generations. Jewish tradition teaches that originally the Lord destined Leah as a bride for Esau. And Rachel was destined as the bride for Jacob. Esau forfeited the opportunity to marry the godly Leah when he married these Hittite girls. Jacob attained Esau's birthright and blessing, and he stole Esau's identity when he said, "I am Esau." Having stolen the identity, in consequence, he received Esau's destined bride. That's how it works. So there he was, running from the anger of his brother Esau. Why? Because he had been guilty of deceiving his father. Now he himself is being deceived by his father-in-law. Whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. Adoni-Bezek, when he was captured. How many have heard of Adoni-Bezek? Maybe you haven't studied a lot of biblical history, but when he was captured, they cut off his thumbs, they cut off his big toes, and he said, "There have been 70 kings who ate meat at my table, whose thumbs and big toes that I have cut off. As I have done, so it has been done to me now." A law of life. That's how it worked. A law that God had established within nature. It's not karma. That's Buddha's law. There's a lot attached to karma that you don't see. We don't use karma. Karma's not in our economy. It's God's law. Whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. It's a necessary law in order to keep order in nature. Life would be almost impossible, chaotic at the least, if there were not a law of nature, if you did not reap what you sowed. Think about it. The whole agricultural industry would be chaotic without that law imputed into nature. You go out and you plant your beans and you raise carrots. It would be chaotic. The law of sowing and reaping is not just valid in the physical universe. The Bible declares it also valid in the spiritual realm, folks. Whatever you sow, that's what you are going to reap. If you sow to the flesh, of the flesh you're going to reap. If you sow to the Spirit, of your spirit you're going to reap. Watch what you sow into your mind. Watch what you let in. Watch what you plant, because you become what you have planted in your mind. Makes sense? Jacob had deceived. He's now being deceived. And everybody says, that makes perfect sense. Right? Verse 26. And Laban said, "It must not be done so in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Fulfill her week, and we will give you this one also for the service which you will serve with me still another 7 years." Oh man, what a ripoff. I mean, Laban's a crook. In fact, when he and Jacob in the next chapter have their showdown, Jacob accuses him of changing his wages 10 different times. So this isn't the only incident. We're going to talk about more about this. Some of them are not even recorded. 10 different times Laban changed the wages of Jacob. But you know what? Jacob always got the better of him. Always. Jacob always put one over on him. Laban is a despicable kind of a person. And really, the only pleasant part of the story is that Jacob, who wasn't really much better, was able to get the best of him on every turn. Now, it was the custom at that time that when you got married, to spend the first week with your wife. You didn't work, you didn't do anything. You spent that first week with your wife. So Laban says, fulfill Leah's week. You haven't even been with her a week. And then we'll also give you the other one for the service by which you'll serve me for another 7 years. Verse 28. And Jacob did so and fulfilled her week. So he gave him his daughter Rachel as a wife also. And Laban gave his maid Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as a maid. Then Jacob also went into Rachel, and he also loved Rachel more than Leah, and he served with Laban still another 7 years. Here is the case, of course, of polygamy. Polygamy in that culture at that time, very widely accepted. Very widely accepted. And what you could imagine that would happen did indeed happen. Jealousy, rivalry, contention. As Jesus said, no man can serve two masters, so no man can serve two wives. And he was right. Jacob had a partiality for the one who was beautiful, but because he was partial to the beautiful one, negligent towards the lesser one, God had mercy on the lesser one, and she became very prolific as far as bearing children. But there was always sort of that longing for her husband's love that was never fully given to her. But then the other one, not being able to have any children, became very envious, became sort of a witch. So it became a very trying kind of a circumstance there, as we're going to see as we go into the story of 31. When the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. Leah conceived and bore a son for Jacob, and she called his name Reuben, for she said, the Lord has surely looked upon my affliction. Now therefore my husband will love me. And how sad is this? Huh? How sad. I now have a son. Surely, giving him a son, he is going to love me now. So sad. She called his name Reuben, which means, look, a son, or behold, a son. Because she said, the Lord has looked upon my affliction. So she named him, Look, a son, hoping that the birth of the son would bring to her her husband's love. Then she conceived again and bore a son and said, because the Lord has heard that I am unloved, he has therefore given me this son also. And she called his name Simeon, which means hearing. Hearing. God has seen and God has heard. Reuben and Simeon. So the first two sons named after the distress of her own heart for the lack of love that she's receiving from her husband. God sees me, God has heard me, and verse 34, she conceived again and bore a son and said, now this time my husband will become attached to me because I have borne him 3 sons now. Therefore his name was called Levi, or you would probably pronounce it Levi. Hebrew pronunciation, Jewish pronunciation, Levi. So excuse me if I call him Levi because I'm used to it. Therefore his name was called Levi, which means joined, again expressing that yearning for the love of her husband. And she conceived again and bore a son. She's on a roll here. And said, now I will praise the Lord. Therefore she called his name Praise. Called his name Judah. Praise. Then she stopped bearing. So in rapid succession, probably on a 4-year period of time, she bears him 4 sons. And Rachel remained barren the whole time. In that culture, the greatest thing that a woman could ever do was to bear a son for her husband. I mean, that's the ultimate. In fact, in that culture, if you're unable to give your husband a son, you can actually be legally divorced if all you bear is girls. You can be legally divorced. He can say, all right, we tried 6 times. I got 6 girls. You're done. If you cannot bear children at all, he can legally divorce you. Still that way over there today. Still that way. When the woman would go into labor, everyone gathered and struck up the band, and they brought in food and drinks and party material, and they sat and they waited, and whoop, and then little streamers, and they're blowing little things ready for the all-night party. If the midwife came out and said, "It's a girl," they'd fold everything up and they'd go home. Just like that. Bearing him a son is considered the greatest thing ever. And Leah was able to bear 4 sons in rapid succession. Now, that should put her on top of the pile, I would think. She was hoping that it would. Now, this time, she said, my husband will become attached to me because I have borne him 3 sons already. Therefore, his name was called Levi, which means joined, attached. Every time she called the name of the child, she would be hoping that Jacob would catch on and become attached to her. Come here, attached. Attached. Come here. Now, when Rachel saw, chapter 30, that she bore Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister Leah. So the problem between the 2 sisters, envy and jealousy. And she said to Jacob, "Give me children or else I die." The envy didn't really bring her much comfort from Jacob. Her attitude caused his anger to rise against her. Jacob's anger was aroused against Rachel, and he says, "Who am I, God? Who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb? Don't blame me, woman. It's obvious I'm able to produce children." Basically, that's what he was saying to her. It's pretty obvious. I'm able to bear children. Don't blame me. So she said, "Here is my maid Bilhah. Go into her, and she will bear a child on my knees, that I may also have children by her." Then she, a surrogate mother, then she gave him Bilhah, her maid, as wife, and Jacob went into her. Have we heard this story before? What is wrong with this family? And Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Then Rachel said, "God has judged my case. He has also heard my voice and given me a son." Therefore, she called his name Dan, which means judged. The Lord has judged my case. Dan. And Rachel's maid Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. And Rachel said, "With great wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister, and indeed I have prevailed. I have 2 sons now." So she called his name Naphtali. Wrestlings. And so it's interesting how that the children were named after hopes, aspirations, or named after circumstances of their birth, isn't it? Verse 9. Now when Leah saw that she had stopped bearing, now just look at all of the competition here. You don't read of Jacob complaining any of this time, you know. He's never complaining. Jacob never complains all the time, you know. He got all these kids over here, all these kids over here. He never complains. Yeah. He just goes along with everything. Probably thought, okay, well, you crazy women just fight it out and figure it out and let me know where I need to be and when I need to be there. No complaints. Crazy women. When Leah saw that she had stopped bearing, she took Zilpah her maid and gave her to Jacob as wife. And Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a son. This doesn't end, does it? Then Leah said, "A troop comes." So she called his name Gad, troop. And probably that's what she was hoping, that she would have a troop of children. And Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a second son. Then Leah said, "I am happy, for the daughters will call me blessed." So she called his name Asher, happy. Sounds like the 7 dwarfs, doesn't it? Happy, praise, judge, troop, wrestling, doc, grumpy. Yeah. You got them all there. Verse 14, now Reuben went in the days of wheat harvest, and at this time Reuben was probably 7 or 8 years old here. Okay? And he found mandrakes in the field and brought them to his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, please give me some of your son's mandrakes. But she said to her, is it a small matter that you have taken away my husband? Would you now take away my son's mandrakes too? There was a lot of bitterness between the sisters, and it's sad. It's tragic, really. No doubt it was not a happy, peaceful home. And I don't know how you could have a happy, peaceful home in these types of circumstances. Mandrakes were thought to be, by the way, to explain what's going on here, mandrakes were thought to be a stimulant to fertility. Okay? So they were considered to be sort of an aphrodisiac, a kind of drug, found within the roots of the mandrakes. And it's possible that Rachel was hoping to take the mandrakes and perhaps create fertility, for they were thought to be like a fertility drug. So when Reuben found the mandrakes in a field, and they were pretty on the outside, so he's probably picking them for mom, And that's how kids do. How many mothers here ever got dandelions from their children? Huh? They thought, oh, we got a hand. We got several hands, actually. How about that? I used to bring my mother 4-leaf clovers. Yeah, and if I couldn't find any 4-leaf clovers, I would split the leaf off of a 3-one, and I would make it 4. I think she knew. So when Reuben found the mandrakes in the field, brought them home to his mother, Leah, Rachel says, oh, I would like to have those mandrakes. And Leah retorted, isn't it enough you've taken away my husband? Now you want my son's mandrakes too? Rachel said to her, hey, I'll let you sleep with him tonight for your son's mandrakes. What a dysfunctional family. And Edie, what are you laughing at? You can't keep from laughing. And Rachel said, therefore, he will lie with you tonight for your son's mandrakes. She agrees. When Jacob came out of the field in the evening, Leah went out to meet him and said, you must come into me, for I have surely hired you with my son's mandrakes. And he's like, oh, just tell me where I need to be. And he laid with her that night. You crazy women. You thought your family was dysfunctional. And God listened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a 5th son. Leah said, God has given me my wages because I have given my maid to my husband. So she named his son Issachar. Issachar. Hired. H-I-R-E-D. Hired. Then Leah conceived again and bore Jacob a 6th son. And Leah said, God has endowed me with a good endowment. Now my husband will dwell with me, because I've borne him 6 sons. So she called his name Zebulun, meaning dwelling, hoping that her husband would now dwell in her tent, because she was able to produce so many children. He was not currently dwelling in her tent. Still, the sadness persists. Verse 21, and afterward she bore a daughter, which put her out of the ballgame, folks. She's done. Called her name Dinah, vindicated, justified. Dinah. In the vernacular, I'm done. That's really what that means. I'm done. Imagine what it must have been like. That little girl, Dinah, and all those big brothers, 10 brothers now. Huh? She no doubt had a pretty good life. Those brothers, let me tell you, those brothers loved her so much. They would give each one of them would have given their life for her. They loved her. They included her. They worshiped the ground she walked on. And really, they were very, very jealous for her. Nobody touched her. And we'll find out a little later in the story just to what extreme they go to protect their little sister. And it's amazing. Because in that culture, women were not regarded in high esteem. But boy, did those boys love that little girl. Then, verse 22, God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her and opened her womb. Can we just give a big clap? Yay! Finally, maybe some of this contention can stop. And she conceived and bore a son and said, "Oh, God has taken away my reproach." And she called his name, and you know it, Joseph, and said, "The Lord shall add to me another son." So, in hope and in faith, she called his name Adding, 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 and declared that God will add another son. And indeed, she did have one more son after they had returned to the land of Israel and were in the area there near Bethlehem. Her second son was born, which would have been the 12th son of Jacob. And in the childbirth, Rachel died. She died. And so as the child was being born, and she was having such a difficult time in that delivery, she called out his name, Benoni, Benoni, son of misery. But Jacob changed his name, as you know, to Benjamin, Benjamin. Benjamin was the little brother of all of those other 11 brothers. The son of my right hand is what he called Benjamin, meaning the son of my right hand. So it's true that God had given to her one more son. And it came to pass when Rachel had borne Joseph that Jacob said to Laban, "Send me away that I may go to my own place and to my own country. I want to go back home." Now he has 11 sons and he wants to go back home. The 2 wives and their 2 maids, and he's asking Laban to send them away. "Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you. Let me go, for you know my service which I have done for you." So I fulfilled my obligation, he says. I put in the 14 years. And Laban said to him, "Please stay if I have found favor in your eyes. I've learned by experience that the Lord has blessed me because of you." And that word translated experience there is the Hebrew word for enchantments. And it's possible that he's saying, I have learned by enchantments that the Lord is blessing me for your sake. Laban was involved in the worship of false gods. He had perhaps gone into one who was a worker of divination, a diviner, or enchantments, and trying to learn the reasons for his success. And he learned by it that Jacob was the reason for God's blessings, that the Lord had blessed me for your sake. Then he said, "Name me your wages and I'll give it to you. I want you to stay." Earlier, he had said, "You got a good deal, and I'll serve you 7 years for your daughter Rachel, your younger daughter." I'm sure that was far more than what Laban was expecting. He was going to give her anyway. So knowing Jacob is sort of a soft touch in the fact of naming his own wages and all, he tells him, "Name your wages, you stick around. I've found that I've been blessed because you're here. So name your wages." I'm sure that he can hardly believe his ear when Jacob named his wages. He really did. Look at verse 29 here. Jacob said to him, "You know how I served you and how your livestock has been with me. For what you had before I came was very little, and it has now increased to a great amount." Jacob is reminding him, "You didn't have very much when I came here. Now you have a whole bunch. You got a lot. The Lord has blessed you since my coming. And now when shall I also provide for my own house?" So he said, "What shall I give you?" Jacob said, "You shall not give me anything. But do this one thing for me, and I will again feed and keep your flocks." I'll stay on. "Let me pass through all your flocks today, removing from there all the speckled and spotted sheep, and all the brown ones among the lambs, and the spotted and the speckled among the goats. And these shall be my wages. So my righteousness will answer for me in time to come, when the subject of my wages comes before you. Everyone that is not speckled and spotted among the goats and brown among the lambs will be considered stolen if it's with me. So you're going to have the solid colors. I'm going to take the speckled, the spotted, the off-colored, and I'm going to go over here. You're going to stay over here." Laban says, "Oh, what a deal. Okay, according to your word," he says. "All right." What he was saying is this: "You go through the flocks now, and you remove all the speckled and spotted among the flocks and all the brown lambs. These will be my wages. And the solid colors, they become yours. You take out now the speckled spotted so that there's no chance for them to breed with the solid colors. Then whatever are born from the solid colored animals, listen, whatever then is born from the solid colored animals, if they're speckled and spotted or brown, they would become my wages. The speckled and the spotted, born from the solid colored animals, would then become mine also, which would not have been very many because it's very rare. 2 solids would equal a solid in most cases. So Laban gladly agreed to that, Seemed like that could only benefit him. He's like, oh, what a deal for me. You mean you want me to take all the solid colors, and then when they mate and they have offspring, that your only wages at that point would be anything born speckled and spotted out of the solid colors? Where do I sign? And Laban said, oh, according to your word. Verse 35, Laban removed that day the male goats that were speckled and spotted, all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, and every one that had some white in it, and all the brown ones among the lambs, and gave them into the hand of his sons. And he tells his sons, put 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob. Separate our flocks for 3 days. So Laban cheated him. He agreed to let Jacob have all the speckled and spotted from his flocks. Number 1. Then before Jacob has a chance to go through the flocks, he has his sons go out there and remove all the speckled, spotted, and leave only the solid colors from which Jacob could choose. And he tells them, put them about 3 days' journey away. What a crooked man. So when Jacob goes through the flock, there's nothing there. And Jacob fed the rest of Laban's flocks. The only thing Jacob would now get is the spotted and the speckled that would be born now from the solid colors that Laban has. Laban is loving this deal. And I get to keep him, and he is contracted now with me, and I get all the work from him, and he only gets the speckled out of the solid colors. And he really thought he had it made. He really thought he had it made. Well, wouldn't you think that he had it made? I would think that he would have it made. And he really took Jacob for a fool. But Jacob was not about to be outmaneuvered. No. Not Jacob, not heel catcher, not the supplanter, not the deceiver. Verse 37, Jacob took for himself, look what he does now. See, Jacob, let me explain before we get into this, because if I start reading this, you're going to get lost and you're going to think, what's happening here? So, Jacob is a shepherd. Jacob has been around flocks all his life. He has delivered the little lambs, the goats. He has been there from beginning of conception to the very end of the birth. He knows when they're going in heat. He knows what excites them. He knows everything that there is to know about flocks and herds. So, verse 37. So then, now that you know that background, Jacob, in response to what Laban had done, took for himself rods of green poplar and of the almond and chestnut trees, peeled white strips in them, pretty much painted white strips on them, and exposed the white which was in the rod. So he peeled them back until they looked like they had been painted. And the rods which he had peeled, he set before the flocks in the gutters, in the watering troughs, where the flocks came to drink, so that they should conceive when they came to drink. So the flocks conceived before the rods that he put there, and the flocks brought forth streaked, speckled, and spotted offspring. Then Jacob separated the lambs and made the flocks faced toward the street, and all the brown in the flock of Laban. But he put his own flocks by themselves and did not put them with Laban's flock. So it came to pass, whenever the stronger livestock conceived, that Jacob placed the rods before their eyes of the livestock in the gutters, that they might conceive among the rods. But when the flocks were feeble, he did not put them in. So the feebler were Laban's, and the stronger were Jacob's. Thus the man became exceedingly prosperous and had large flocks, female and male servants, and camels and donkeys. And I know what you're thinking. Lay it on us, Pastor. What's going on here? What just happened? He really began to prosper as he was very skilled in the art of husbandry. There are those who would criticize this account, and they have, because they say that Jacob believed in prenatal marketing. Prenatal marketing. There was a belief that was a vivid sight during pregnancy would leave a mark on the embryo. That by putting these striped rods, that he thought that he could then, in this prenatal suggestion, he could create the striped and the speckled offspring. So that when they conceived around the watering trough, if they saw the speckled and the spotted rods, that they would that this prenatal marking would take effect on the embryo, and it would produce this speckled and spotted offspring. It could be that is what Jacob was thinking. It could be. I wouldn't put it past him. However, you have to realize this fellow has 80 years of experience at least in husbandry, in the observation of the processes of conception among the animals and the development of a species. He probably knew by experimentation and by observation what is the law concerning the dominant and the recessive genes. And knowing that even in the solid colored animals, there could be the recessive spots and stripes. And you would just have to wait for it, and it would surely eventually manifest. King James translates the word Yahom as conceived. But the word hom means hot. And so Yahom means to be hot. More likely, understanding a little bit about animal reproduction, he knew that as the animals came in for the watering, when the white striped branches were placed in front of them, that somehow it caused them to come into heat and thus to reproduce. And rather than trying to prenatal suggestion mark the animals, it was probably the process to take when the stronger ones would come in. He would want them to reproduce, because the chance then of developing a stronger flock for himself, because if they were to give off speckled or spotted, then he got to keep them, and they would came from a stronger offspring. So he's really thinking the process out. And he would bring them into heat with these striped rods. And it was the Lord really who gave him the strong, speckled, and spotted ones, because later on Jacob himself even acknowledged that it was God who had prospered and blessed him. It was God who did that. I don't know about the nonsense about the rod thing. I don't know why he did that. There was something that he thought, perhaps there was maybe an old wives' tale. I don't know. Maybe he knew that there was something to it. Maybe there was something to it. Could be. As he was returning, he said, Lord, I am not worthy of the least of thy mercies that you have shown to me. When I pass over this river, I have not only my rod in my, when I pass over the river, I only had my rod in my hand. That's the only position I have, just my walking stick. It's all I had when I came here. Now I'm coming back, and I have so many sheep and oxen and camels that I have to separate them into two companies in order to travel. And he was overwhelmed with the grace of God and the mercies of God towards him. And he acknowledged that it was God who granted him success, not his own devices. So where some theologians would see him in this position as scheming, I wouldn't put it past him, I suppose. Trying to put one over on Laban by creating a prenatal suggestion, thus marking the animals by their looking at the stripes as they were conceiving. If you would read the word conceived, it means to be brought into heat. So you get, at least from the Hebrew, a more accurate understanding of really what the passage is saying. Reading it in the Hebrew, there's not so much as a suggestion as him trying to mark them a particular way. It was more of he was trying to induce them into heat so that his chances would be greater. And the Bible doesn't teach the validity of visual prenatal influence over genetics. Whatever superstitious ideas were behind Jacob's placing those branches in the troughs, it was God who caused the increase in the speckled sheep and goats. I want you to understand that. Bottom line is, we can debate all of that other stuff, but the bottom line is, and Jacob even himself admitted it, it was God who increased Jacob. All of Jacob's work had been for naught. Peeling the branches, setting them out in front of the flocks, really a lack of faith on his part. Jacob's schemes to increase his flock were unnecessary. God had already determined to enrich him. God was already going to increase his flock. And God graciously worked, not because of his striped branches, but in spite of them. I told you this morning I was probably going to go 10, 15 minutes over, but we got through these 2 chapters. And I'm right on time. So again, who would know? Next week we're going to tackle. No, we're going to tackle chapter 31. Things are going to get real interesting from this point on, and I hope you're going to join us next week. Things are going to get really interesting. Hope you've been enjoying the 1 hour of Bible study. You could study an hour at home, and this is a little different, you know. We take that 1 hour of Bible study a week. We come together. We get to fellowship, number one. Number two, then you're going to get, you'll be recipients of the, and not braggadociously do I speak at all in any terms, but you're going to be a recipient of my studies and the experiences that I have had in and with the Jewish community, and so you get a little bit more background and history than if you would just sit under your lamp at home. I do encourage you to read your Bible at home, though. Don't just make this your exclusive study. Read ahead and see what you can figure out, and then when we come back together, we'll put the pieces together. That's always fun, too. Chapter 31 next week. I hope you'll join us. Father, thank you for our time together tonight. Bless each one that has come out. Thank you for, Lord, their dedication and loyalty to your word. Bless us. Give us a good week, I pray. Now may the Lord bless and keep you. May he cause his face to shine upon you. May the Lord be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you